I believe that it was in part one of my Fox News commentary that I told everyone that the Supreme Court of the United States was going to review a case that would limit the sale of video games. Now, specifically, how this happens, and I'm going to kind of discuss how the whole case gets to the Supreme Court. So, if you live in the United States, you should already kind of know how cases get to the Supreme Court. But I know I have plenty of international viewers too, who probably don't know much about the United States judiciary system. So I'm going to try to kind of explain how the law got to the Supreme Court, or the case, I should say. So it did start out as a law, specifically in California. So I believe it was the state of California, although it could have been more local than that. But I think it was a state passed a law that basically said that minors are not allowed to buy violent video games. Now, I put violent there because, in these little air quotations, because that's a very important word, you know? I mean, minors already basically can't buy M-rated games. I mean, you can technically buy them if you're 17, but you have to be 17 or older. That's really close to just outright banning them for sale to children. So, that's the idea behind it. Most places won't sell games if you're not the age specified on the box. So if the law said something like, oh, we're going to make it so you have to be 18 or over to buy an M-rated game, that wouldn't be a very big deal. It's only a difference of 1 year. That'd be kind of annoying for, teenagers, but it wouldn't be that big of a deal. It was worrying, this law was worrying though because it said violence. What type of games are violent, Like, teen-rated games are almost always violent. Like, think of Uncharted. That game's only rated teen. So, theoretically, this law could be construed, or implied, to ban games like Uncharted, which are only rated teen. So all of a sudden we got a much bigger problem. Even some E10 rated games have, like, comic violence or comedic violence. Could those be banned too? I mean, I doubt that the law would have been taken that way in California, but it set a bad precedent for what could be passed in other states. I was worried that some other states might pass it that have, I don't really know how to explain it, but have different politics, and they might actually make it so you can't have teen-rated games until you're an adult, which is obviously not the intent of a teen rating. Clearly it's called teen because it's for teenagers. So, it was worrying as a precedent. It was also worrying because it could be interpreted in a lot of different ways. It did not have a very clear meaning to me. To be fair, I didn't read the whole law, but every site that I've looked at explaining it said that it would ban the sale of violent games to minors. We know. So, that worried me for two big reasons there. So obviously the video game industry has many reasons to be involved in this. First of all, money. Let's be honest about it. They love being able to sell games to teenagers because they make money off of teenagers. Okay, fair enough, they're a business company too, whatever. But also it was a big deal because of free speech and just being able to make the games. Because, theoretically this could go on further. And, it's a logical fallacy, I know, to say that all video games would be banned because of this. But I did feel like they might try to take this farther in the future. It worried me some. So now that you know what the law says, basically, I've already explained why the video game industry was interested. Mostly money, but also free speech. They weren't fighting just for money, I don't think. So when you throw in free speech in the United States, it becomes a constitutional issue, obviously. So it was passed in California, this law, and someone took it to court. Someone said this isn't constitutional. I believe that some video game group did, or some group that advocates free speech. And they said, look, video games, which is a form of media, they have opinions, they should be protected under freedom of speech. So then it went up to, a court, they made a decision, it was appealed, it was appealed, went to the next court, and yada yada yada. Eventually you get to, like, a district court, and eventually it gets appealed more and more and more until you appeal it to the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court can choose to hear cases or not hear cases. Normally, the cases that they hear have to do with constitutional matters. Like, for example, in this case, is this a freedom of speech issue or not? That's one reason why I mentioned just a couple minutes ago in this video that freedom of speech was involved in this. It was very important for the video game industry to make this an issue of freedom of speech, because that way it had a better chance of being taken up by the Supreme Court. And that's probably a good thing, because, you know, it's annoying for the video game industry and for gamers to have to deal with different laws in all these different states. It's good to have just one court, you know, the Supreme Court, make a decision that everyone has to follow. So finally, it'll be somewhat regulated nationwide, and you'll know what the rules are everywhere. So, like I said, I first introduced this case, I believe, in the Fox News commentary part 1, which got like thousands and thousands of views, which is awesome. I was so happy that they got so many views, but a lot of these viewers asked me in the comments, what did the Supreme Court decide? And I was like, I don't know. Because they only decided a couple days ago, you see. So the Supreme Court's notorious for taking a long time to get the cases, and especially to decide them. But normally, to be fair to them, they are important cases. So, in this case, the Supreme Court finally made a decision, and they have decided that you cannot ban video games from being sold to minors. The argument, which I agree with completely, was basically, you know what? It's freedom of speech. You cannot, I believe they said almost exactly, you cannot limit, a state cannot limit the ideas to which children are exposed. You know, it's up to parents, basically, to do that. Which I think is a great decision for a million reasons. But let's discuss the technicality of it. Because, you know, you get the main ruling, and it's great news, you know? It's good for gamers everywhere, it's good for the game industry, it's good for freedom of speech. It's good because, you know, it shows that in the future, when new forms of media come out, and I'm sure they will, you know, this will set a good example that they cannot be censored like this. Now, I think it's unreasonable censorship. But, you know, this lets everyone have fun with the games, and this gives people more freedom, really. And it guarantees it because it's the Supreme Court. So, who's going to argue with them? Now, technically the Supreme Court, this is not necessarily a permanent decision. It's extremely close, but technically the Supreme Court can undo a ruling. But a case of the same exact issue, basically, would have to come back to the Supreme Court in order for them to take back their ruling now. The only famous example I can think of the Supreme Court reversing a ruling was Brown v. Board of Education. And that was about segregation in public schools. So obviously, you know, the opinions of people changed a lot during like 1900s on that issue. I don't think people's opinions are going to go against video games on this issue ever. If anything, I think people are beginning to support video games more and more. So I highly doubt that they would ever reverse this ruling. I highly doubt that a case like this would ever get to the Supreme Court again. They hardly ever reverse rulings. Like I said, there's only one case I can think of when they ever did. So this means that the ruling is almost permanent. You know, there's next to no chance that they'll ever undo this type of ruling. The decision, there are 9 judges, the decision was 7-2. Which is pretty good. They make a lot of 5-4 decisions, and those are kind of like, they might actually reverse those. But 7-2, they're very unlikely to, you know, it's very unlikely that the majority will ever change their mind on this. 7-2 is a pretty safe ruling. It's not 9-0, which worries me a little bit, because it's like, there are 2 high-level judges, 2 of the highest-level judges in the country, think it's okay to ban video games for a whole portion of the population. That's kind of worrying. But at the same time, you know, you got 7 people who say it isn't. That's a pretty safe majority. But this is really good news. You know, it basically means that Jack Thompson now can't go around trying to support laws that do this. This is very easy to point to this ruling and say it's unconstitutional now. So video games, I think, are much safer from any type of censorship thanks to this law. Which I think is good news for all sorts of people out there. I've been waiting for this ruling for a long time. I know a lot of viewers have too, so I just thought I'd make this video and update you in case you hadn't found out already. I would have made this video a little earlier, but because the ruling was like almost a week ago. But I was on vacation when it happened, and I didn't really have a webcam. So sorry about that, but in case you didn't already know, I hope this filled you in. If you did know, I hope it told you some details that you didn't know before. So, let's all go back to enjoying our horribly violent video games.